Welcome to the Configuring FortiGate SSL VPN lesson. After completing this lesson, you will be able to achieve these objectives. Describe what SSL VPN is and its benefits. Describe how FortiGate SSL VPN works. Configure FortiGate SSL VPN. Apply general best practices when using SSL VPN. Secure Sockets Layer Virtual Private Network, SSL VPN, is a type of VPN that uses SSL encryption to create a secure and encrypted connection between a client device and a device acting as a VPN server. Although SSL VPN is most commonly used to grant remote workers access to their corporate networks, it is also possible to configure it between two FortiGate firewalls. In this lesson, you will learn about the remote access implementation. Many organizations opt to use SSL VPN for remote access over the IPsec VPN. However, each technology has its pros and cons, so you should examine your scenario carefully to make the best choice. These are some benefits of using SSL VPNs with FortiGate. It is important to note that some of these benefits apply only to specific configurations. Click each benefit to learn more. SSL VPNs are available in two modes, web mode and tunnel mode. Based on your requirements, you can deploy an SSL VPN using one mode or both. Click each mode to learn its details. Configuring SSL VPN requires several steps that vary according to specific requirements. The process is very simple and involves the following general steps. Step 1 is to create the users and/or groups you want to grant permissions to connect. You can use local users or any of the supported remote authentication servers for this. Step 2 is to review and, if needed, edit the SSL VPN portals. FortiGate includes 3 default SSL VPN portals configured for web access, tunnel access, or both. You can also create custom portals to meet specific needs for specific users. Note that SSL VPN is not enabled by default, so no portals will be visible until you enable the feature under System Feature Visibility. Additionally, web mode must also be enabled as a separate step to be able to see the third, web access, portal. The following are some general best practices to keep in mind when working with SSL VPN. Click each tab to learn more. Now let's watch a senior Fortinet instructor demonstrate the following tasks.
And I'm here to show you how to configure and test an SSL VPN connection using FortiGate. I'll show you the steps for both web mode and tunnel mode and compare the differences between the two. Task 1. Verify user accounts. In many cases, the first step to configure SSL VPN is to create the users and groups that will allow to connect. For this demo, I already created a user and a group, so I just want to show you what they are. Let's start by connecting to the FortiGate GUI and logging in as the admin. Go to User and Authentication, and once there, to User Groups. In here, you can see I created a group called Remote VPN Users with User 1 as its only member. Let's start configuring the SSL VPN. Task 2. Configure the SSL VPN portal. Before I start, I must warn you that you may need to enable the SSL VPN feature using the feature visibility under System. For the case of SSL VPN web mode, you must enable it from the CLI. In this demo, all those are already enabled. FortiGate includes 3 default SSL VPN portals. Let's see what they are. Click VPN, SSL VPN portals. These 3 portals provide general settings for each combination of using the web mode, the tunnel mode, or both. In this demo, I'll show you both modes, so I'll double-click the full access portal to see how it is configured. I first want to focus on the basic settings. At the top of the page, you can choose to limit users to a single connection. I'll be using 2 concurrent connections during this demo, so I'll leave this option disabled. The next 2 sections are all about using tunnel mode. First, I want to make sure tunnel mode is enabled. We can configure split tunneling so that only the relevant traffic is sent through the tunnel. In more secure scenarios, you must disable this option to force all traffic through the FortiGate firewall so that it can be fully inspected. We don't need it for this demo though, so I'll keep the default setting. Also, in this section, you can select the IP address pool to be assigned to the clients after they connect. FortiGate includes a default pool that goes from 10.212.134.200 to 10.212.134.210. You can see this range by hovering your mouse over the pool name. Of course, you can edit this pool to add more addresses or even create new pools. This is important, for example, when you need to create custom policies for different clients. You must remember that you can create more SSL portals, each one with different settings. For our demo, the default pool is enough. Lower on the page, you can decide whether to enable host check, also known as client integrity, and whether to restrict connections to specific OS versions. We don't need to do this for this demo. Further down the page, I want to verify that web mode is enabled. The warning is a strong recommendation of using tunnel mode only, but we are just exploring web mode since it may still be required in some scenarios. I want to keep the default landing page, but want to change the portal message to Welcome to the SSL VPN demo. I'll also change the theme to Dark Matter. In the predefined bookmark section, I'll click Create New to add a bookmark. I'll name it Internal Web Server, leave the type as HTTP/HTTPS, set the URL to HTTP 10.0.1.10, and click OK to save the changes. The URL used here points to the IP address of a Linux VM running the Apache web server. Also notice at the bottom of the page that you can allow users to download FortiClient from the portal. Let's click OK to save everything. We are finished with the portal settings. Let's continue to the SSL VPN settings. Task 3. Configure SSL VPN settings. Let's move now to VPN SSL VPN settings. This page has 4 sections: connection settings, tunnel mode client settings, web mode settings, and authentication portal mapping. In the connection settings section, I need to select the interface where the client connection requests will be received. In my case, this is port 1. Next, we need to choose the port that clients need to point to connect. There are a couple of approaches for this. One is to use a custom port, that is, a port other than 443. This will prevent any conflict with the port used for administrative access. However, this means that all the clients need to be made aware of the port number used, and chances are that your help desk will get lots of tickets about it. Another solution is to use a custom port for the administrative access instead, and leave the defaults of 443 for the SSL VPN connections. This way, clients don't need to be notified about any custom number since they can use the default value. Administrators now need to be aware of the custom port when managing the firewall. There is, however, a best of both worlds solution. If the external interface, that is the one receiving the client connections, is not used for administrative access, and it shouldn't be, you can still use the default port 443. FortiGate will alert you about the possible conflict, but you know better. I'll use this method. So I'll use port 443 and ignore the warning since I know port 1 is not configured for administrative access. The next setting is the certificate that will be used to secure all VPN traffic. In a production environment, you should use a certificate purchased from a trusted certificate authority or one generated using your organization's public key infrastructure if you have it in place. For this demo, however, I'll use one of the self-signed certificates included with FortiGate. This, of course, will generate a warning message every time I try to connect, and that's what you want to avoid in a real scenario. But since this is only a demo, this choice is fine. Let's select Fortinet Factory in the Server Certificate field. At the very bottom of the page, in the Authentication Portal Mapping section, we need to map the user group we created with the portal we configured before. Note that there is a default mapping if you don't set a portal. Unless you have a good reason to do otherwise, I'd leave it like that since it could potentially allow more users than needed. To add a new mapping, click Create New, and then click the plus to add the remote VPN users group. From the portal drop-down menu, select Full Access, and then click OK. Click Apply to save the changes. The SSL VPN settings are now complete. However, we still need to configure a firewall policy to allow traffic. Let's do that next. Task 4. Configure the firewall policy. We need a firewall policy that permits traffic from the VPN clients to connect to and access the resources they need in the internal network. This policy is like any other, with the difference that it uses the virtual tunnel as the incoming interface. To create the policy, I'll click Policy and Objects, Firewall Policy, and then click on the plus. I'll name the new policy SSL VPN Access, and then select the SSL VPN tunnel interface as I mentioned before as the incoming interface. For the outgoing interface, I'll select port 3, which is where the internal Linux VM is connected. For the source, the SSL VPN tunnel ADDR1 address pool. Remember that this is the address range that is assigned to VPN clients. For the user group, I'll select the remote VPN users group. For the destination, I'll pick the local subnet. I'll keep the schedule as always and select all services. The choice of services, of course, depends on what you want to allow users to access. I'll leave the rest of the options as the defaults, but again, you should adjust each one according to your requirements. Now, click OK to save the configuration. Finally, we have configured all the components. All that is left is to verify that everything works. Task 4. Test the SSL VPN connection. Now that we have our FortiGate ready, let's test it to see if we can connect to it using SSL VPN from a client computer. I will log into a Linux VM that is connected to the FortiGate external interface. This Linux VM has a web browser and FortiClient VPN installed so we can test both SSL VPN modes. Let's test web mode first. I'll open a web browser and try to access the URL https 10.200.1.1. This is the IP address of my FortiGate external port. Since we are using a self-signed certificate, we may get the expected security warning, and we should accept and continue. Voila! Things are looking great, and we can see the login page of the SSL VPN portal. I'll use the user credentials I created and then click Login. This is great. We were able to log in, and we can see that the message, the theme, and the bookmark we set for the SSL VPN portal were applied. I'll click the bookmark to check if I can see the internal server page. You may need to allow pop-ups for this page since it opens on a new tab. Into too much detail, but it is interesting to look at the URL on the new tab and notice the FortiGate is acting as a proxy. I'll come back to the tab with the portal and test something else. If I click the box under Quick Connection, I can see the different protocols and services I can access. Of course, they must be configured beforehand on the other side for them to work. I'll select SSH and type the address of the internal server, 10.0.1.10, and then click Launch Now. I need to type the credentials, then click OK, and look at that. We are in the Linux VM. Isn't that amazing? I think it is. Okay, now we know that the web mode works perfectly. Let's try the tunnel mode. First, we need to create a new VPN connection in FortiClient. I'll open FortiClient, type the IP address of our FortiGate external interface, type the user credentials, and moment of truth, click Connect. Again, we get the certificate warning, so I'll click OK, and we are in. Let's try accessing the same Linux VM as before. First, the web page at http 10.0.1.10. Good. Now, let's try SSH. Another success. We just tested both modes and confirmed our SSL VPN settings work perfectly. To wrap things up, let's look at where the administrators can see information about the connected clients. For that, I'll go to the FortiGate dashboard, network, and then expand the SSL VPN widget. In here, you can see the two active connections from the same user. To see more details, I can click in the Connections column and select View Connection Details. This concludes the SSL VPN demo. I hope you found it useful.
You have completed this lesson. You are now able to describe what SSL VPN is and its benefits. Describe how FortiGate SSL VPN works. Configure FortiGate SSL VPN. Apply general best practices when using SSL VPN.